Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a place that wasn't just some ancient temple, but the ultimate, undeniable axis of the ancient Mediterranean world. We're talking about the Oracle of Delphi. For over 1,000 years, if you were a king planning a war, a city drafting a new constitution, or a general setting out to build a colony, you absolutely did not make a move without consulting the Oracle first. But right off the bat, I want you to consider something. What if the greatest magic of the ancient world, the undeniable prophecies that literally directed the fates of millions, was actually a geological accident? I know, it sounds impossible, but as you're about to see, the true story of Delphi is this mind-bending intersection of earth science, human psychology, and absolute power.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. Myth meets modern science.
The contrast between the myth and the reality here is just incredible. So, according to the famous Homeric hymn, a young god Apollo arrived at Mount Parnassus, fired his silver arrows, and slayed this monstrous serpent named Python, who was guarding an ancient earth goddess shrine. Fast forward to the 20th century, though, and modern geological surveys reveal a totally different kind of power. They discovered that Delphi sits perfectly above the intersection of two major geological fault lines, the Kerna Fault and the Delphi Fault. To put that into perspective, let's rewind to 1400 BC. Modern excavations by the French school at Athens proved that long before the Greeks worshipped Apollo there, Delphi was a late Bronze Age settlement dedicated to a Mycenaean earth deity. Archaeologists even found these stylized terracotta female figurines to prove it. Actually, scratch that idea that it was always Apollo's. It wasn't until the 8th century BC that his Doric cult truly took over and eventually built those massive stone temples. So why this specific spot? Well, the secret sauce is literally right beneath the floorboards. The bedrock beneath the sanctuary is made of bituminous limestone. When the tectonic plates along those intersecting faults rubbed together, the immense friction heated the rock. This released light hydrocarbon gases, specifically ethylene, methane, and ethane. These sweet-smelling gases bubbled up through the subterranean fissures and the local spring waters. And here's the kicker. When inhaled, ethylene induces a detached, euphoric trance. Ancient writers like Plutarch talked about a sweet-smelling vapor rising from a chasm, and for centuries, historians thought it was just a myth. But the geology proves the ancient texts hit the nail on the head. Section 2. The Pythia and Rituals. We have this immense geological power bubbling to the surface. But how did an ordinary mortal actually channel it? This is perhaps the most shocking contrast of the ancient world. Think about it. The fate of grand empires and the movements of massive armies were all guided by the Pythia. And she wasn't born of some noble pedigree or aristocratic bloodline. No way. She was an uneducated, local peasant woman. Later in Delphi's history, she specifically had to be a mature woman over the age of 50, chosen purely for her blameless character rather than any intellectual training. The Greeks believed a simple mind was a purer vessel for Apollo. Once chosen, she left her family, swore lifelong celibacy, and donned the white robes of a maiden. Delivering a prophecy wasn't an everyday thing. It was a high-stakes event that only happened on the 7th day of the 9 warm months of the year. The ritual checklist was incredibly strict. Step 1, the Pythia underwent rigorous purification in the Castalian spring. Step 2, a goat was sprinkled with ice-cold spring water. It had to physically shudder. If the goat didn't shiver, it meant Apollo was absent, and the day's consultations were immediately canceled. That icy shudder was the ultimate divine green light. Finally, if the goat did shudder, the Pythia would enter the temple, sit on a sacred tripod, and inhale those subterranean vapors, completely surrendering her consciousness so male priests could translate her raw utterances into poetic verse for the waiting consultants. Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 3. Delphi's mystical architecture. The environment itself was literally weaponized to prepare petitioners before they even heard a prophecy. The architecture of Delphi was a psychological gauntlet. Perched on the terrifying semicircular Phaedriades cliffs of Mount Parnassus, pilgrims had to hike up the sacred way. This steep, winding path was flanked by treasuries, small, highly ornate structures built by rival Greek city-states to house their war trophies. It was pure political theater in stone. Imagine sweating from the physical climb, gasping for breath, all while walking past monuments celebrating your city's defeats by your rivals. It was designed to intimidate. And right before you faced the god, you entered the pronaos, the entryway of the great temple of Apollo. Carved directly into the stone pillars were profound philosophical maxims, most famously, know thyself and nothing in excess. It forced a brutal moment of self-reflection. You were about to ask the creator of the universe a question. You had better be absolutely sure you knew who you were and what you were really asking. The architectural climax of the entire Greek world was the Adyton. The word itself means not to be entered. It was a restricted, unventilated subterranean chamber at the back of the temple. It wasn't built for beauty, it was built as a trap. Its foundations sat directly over the intersecting Kerna and Delphi faults. Inside sat the omphalos, the carved stone marking the navel of the world. Because the room was enclosed, those rising ethylene and methane gases pooled at high enough concentrations to induce the Pythia's trance, completely hiding her mystical state from the petitioners waiting outside. Section 4. Kings, Conquerors, and Curses. The oracle's prophecies were famous for their strategic ambiguity, and if you guessed wrong, the results were catastrophic. Take King Croesus of Lydia in 546 BC. He was the wealthiest man in the world and wanted to know if he should preemptively attack the rising Persian Empire. He sent massive amounts of gold to Delphi, and the Pythia gave him this legendary reply: "If Croesus crosses the Halys River, he will destroy a great empire." Overjoyed, Croesus marched his army across the river into Persia and was utterly crushed by Cyrus the Great. The great empire he was fated to destroy was his own. In contrast, consider the birth of Western philosophy. Around 431 BC, Socrates' impetuous friend Chaerephon asked the oracle if anyone was wiser than Socrates. The response was shocking. Of all men, Socrates is most wise. Socrates was totally baffled, claiming he knew absolutely nothing. So he started wandering Athens, questioning the top politicians and poets, trying to prove the oracle wrong. He soon realized that while the elites knew very little, they arrogantly believed they knew everything. Socrates realized he was indeed the wisest, simply because he alone recognized his own profound ignorance. And you can't talk about Delphi without mentioning Alexander the Great in 336 BC. Right before invading Persia, he showed up at Delphi on a forbidden day when consultations were strictly banned. Unwilling to wait, Alexander literally marched to the Pythia's residence, grabbed her arm, and physically dragged her toward the temple. Exasperated and completely overwhelmed, she cried out, "You are unstoppable, my son." Alexander instantly dropped her arm, cheerfully declaring he had the blessing he needed, and marched off to conquer the known world. The sheer longevity and scope of Delphi is just staggering. In the 8th century BC, the lawgiver Lycurgus used the oracle's divine endorsement to validate Sparta's brutal, militaristic constitution. Fast forward to 564 BC, the famous fable writer Aesop mocked the greedy locals, was framed for theft, and thrown off a cliff, triggering a terrible curse. In 480 BC, the Themistocles saved Greece by correctly interpreting the oracle's cryptic wooden walls as a command to build a naval fleet against the Persians. In 279 BC, an invading Gaulish army was decimated on the cliffs by flash floods and sudden blizzards that the oracle had promised would protect the sanctuary. And even way later in Roman times, in 67 AD, Emperor Nero visited, grew furious at a prophecy, buried priests alive in the fissure, and looted over 500 bronze statues. So, the crucial point is, how did this single location hold a fractured civilization together? Section 5. Anchor of Ancient Greece. Ancient Greece was a highly fractured civilization of fiercely independent city-states that constantly fought each other. One of Delphi's most brilliant civilizing roles was its handling of something called miasma. Miasma was a terrifying spiritual pollution caused by taboo acts like murder, and they believed it brought plagues and crop failures. Before Delphi's rise, a murder triggered endless bloody tribal vendettas. But Delphi revolutionized Greek law by introducing ritual purification and legal trials for manslaughter. It shifted justice entirely away from brutal tribal revenge and toward a structured, morally based legal system. You see, Delphi wasn't just a fortune teller, it was the ultimate unifying force. In terms of civic law, it provided neutral arbitration, because it was governed by an international council called the Amphictyonic League, completely transcending local rivalries. For geopolitical expansion, Delphi was the central clearinghouse. During the massive population boom between the 8th and 6th centuries BC, no city sent ships out to colonize Italy or Spain without the Pythia blessing the expedition and naming its leader. And for religious authority, the Pythia was the absolute voice of Zeus and Apollo, harmonizing a highly chaotic, fragmented, polytheistic religion. But, as we know, all things must end. By 362 AD, the Roman Emperor Julian the Apostate, a devout pagan ruling a newly Christian empire,
sent envoys to see if the oracle could be restored to its former glory. The Pythia delivered no cryptic puzzles this time, just this final haunting elegy. Tell the king the fair wrought hall has fallen to the ground. No longer has Phoebus Apollo his shelter, nor his prophetic laurel, nor his babbling spring. The speaking water has dried up. It was the official, tragic death knell of the classical pagan world.
Which leaves us with this incredible, lingering question. How did the cryptic riddles of a local peasant woman, sitting over a geological gas leak, manage to unite and govern an entire civilization for 1,000 years? It is an absolute testament to the immense power of belief, the sheer awe of the natural world, and humanity's desperate, enduring need for guidance in the dark. Keep that in mind the next time you look for a sign from the universe. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep seeking the truth.